Welcome, everybody. The Super Bowl has concluded. The Philadelphia Eagles were able to defeat the Chiefs handily in Super Bowl 59. Here today for the Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast to recap and to learn, explore how the Lions can get to the Eagles level. Clearly, right now, it's no long stretch or tall feat to say that right now the Eagles are the class of the NFC. But I don't think that the Lions are all that far behind the Eagles. Are they the number 2 team in the NFC, the number 3? Now that all the 32 teams are in offseason mode, everybody starts 0-0. The new league year starts now. How do the Lions rebuild? How do they compare to what the Eagles did? What happens now for the Detroit Lions? Now we got to also kind of, when you see what the Eagles were able to do, let's really talk deeply about, should the Lions make the move for Myles Garrett? With more information, there's more questions that need to be asked. And Christian and I are going to debate it over the next 60 minutes or so. An interesting Super Bowl that really, to me, Christian, when I look at it aesthetically, that's how I want the Lions to win a Super Bowl, where you go out there and you play a dominant defensive game against one of the game's best. No blitzes against the Chiefs. You dominate in the front four. A young player. I thought rookies are supposed to take time to develop and make plays. Cooper DeJean in the biggest of big games on his birthday. Pick six interception. You realize, my goodness, that Vic Fangio really, with all the experience that he had, put together a game plan to wreck one of the game's great coaches in Andy Reid and their game plan. The Eagles dominated. They were the better team. Clearly, if you were a ball knower and you watched film and you understood the trenches and play and talent and what was going on based on what was happening throughout the year, it was pretty clear that the Eagles were much better than the Chiefs. But the reason why the Chiefs got a lot of love was one player, and that's Patrick Mahomes. So now we get a chance to say, man, if the Lions were ever to get to the Super Bowl, their first ever, I would love it to look like how the Eagles did it. You dominate defensively. You are in the backfield so much. The play that will stick in my mind all year long, maybe even the play of the year, is you get Patrick Mahomes dropping back and you get pressure from the interior and the exterior, and one guy slaps the football loose and another guy pokes him in the face. I mean, that's the epitome of dominating on defense. And so I do think the Lions are trying to build that way, but not as successful as Howie Roseman did it. And look, guys, we always look at it from the perspective of where the Lions are at in regards to the NFC and how close they are to a Super Bowl. But also, too, you have to put in the context that Howie Roseman has 5 times as much experience as Brad Holmes at the position and what he's doing. So I look at it from the perspective of where the Lions are at is a building roster that had an opportunity in 2023 to win it all, but unfortunately execution didn't fall their way. The luck factor was a little bit more towards the Lions in 23, but they fall short against the 49ers. Hence why Dan Campbell reacted that way. 24 is a wash. It's an outlier. You can't judge exactly where the Lions are at rebuild-wise because there were so many injuries. You don't know how the Lions would have fared if everybody stayed healthy and the tides were different going into the Commanders game. But first and foremost, what lessons, Christian, can the Lions glean from what the Eagles were able to do in a dominant Super Bowl win?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, like you mentioned, the defensive line dominance by the Philadelphia Eagles. They had so many different guys get in the mix. Obviously, you have somebody like Jalen Carter, who everybody knows about. But how about Josh Sweat with 2.5 sacks? How about Milton Williams having himself a game on the biggest stage? Nolan Smith seemed like he was always in the backfield, and I could go on and on. They just have so many options. Like their rotations in the trenches are just full of talented players who can come in and do the job. And that's exactly what they did. They made the best quarterback in the game, who was going for a three-peat. They made him uncomfortable the entire afternoon/evening, depending on where you were watching from. And so to me, that just once again reiterates the impact of having a solid pass rush, at all levels in terms of your starters. With a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, he gives the Lions a really good foundation, but now you have to find those pieces around him. And I think that when Aleem McNeil is healthy, he can be one of those guys, but you really have to round out that pass rush. And then another big thing that stood out to me was just being opportunistic on both sides of the ball. The Eagles were super opportunistic on defense. They forced 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, including one by Cooper DeJean that he ran back for a touchdown that I thought was the first like real body blow. Like you can talk about the 10-0 start for the Eagles as being like, okay, the tone for this game is set. But I think the tides really start to change when Cooper DeJean runs that interception back for a touchdown, because it goes from, oh, the Eagles can keep this 10-point lead to halftime and Patrick Mahomes is just going to come back and do it in the second half, to he throws the pick six and you're like, oh boy, like Mahomes is off and the Eagles brought it. And the other thing too was they were opportunistic on offense. Like the Chiefs' entire game plan, it seemed like, was to slow down Saquon Barkley and make Jalen Hurts beat them with his arm. And so the Eagles adjusted. They made the adjustments. Their number one calling card MO was taken away. And so they adapted and they hit the big plays through the air. And the dagger was the touchdown pass to Devontae Smith, which was one play after the Chiefs turned the ball over on downs. So again, opportunistic on both sides of the ball. And when they had their opportunities, they didn't hesitate and they took them. And when you get on the big stage, those opportunities are few and far between. And so if the Lions can take anything from that, it's when you have the chance to make the play, you've got to make the play, because that's what the Eagles did. And they just dominated the 2-time reigning champion.
Okay, so you look at it now, and here's the fair point. We're gonna play a round of fair or foul, okay? Because many people now will look at the Eagles and how they were built. They did take calculated risks at times. They went and paid a running back in Saquon Barkley. They didn't go out and really give up a lot of draft capital, but they took a risk in going out in free agency when a lot of teams are kind of moving away a little bit from running backs. The tide is turning back towards valuing the importance of running backs, seeing clearly how Jahmyr Gibbs was able to excel. And now you see Saquon Barkley. Oh, common sense. You build a nice offensive line. Final piece to the puzzle is, hey, Saquon Barkley. But is it fair or foul to say that maybe the Lions could have built differently? Because you look at it and you say, okay, A.J. Brown was a pick that, you traded a first round pick. You were a little bit aggressive there. But the Eagles, when you look at how they were also built in the draft. Nolan Smith, drafted in the first round. Jalen Carter, first round draft pick. Jordan Davis, drafted in the first round. Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat. Brandon Graham was drafted in the first round. Josh Sweat, drafted in the fourth round. Now, yes, it's clear the Lions have invested in the defensive line, but outside of that first 2021 draft with Hutch, I believe, you look at it and you say, or excuse me, 2022, you look at it and you say, okay, Hutchinson. So the first draft was Penei Sewell in 21. You get him at the number 7 pick, correct? And then the next year, you invest a number 2 pick in Aiden Hutchinson. Now, there are picks in the lower rounds for guys like Josh Pascal, Levi Onwuzurike, and later on, most recently, you make an investment in Broderick Martin, but he's more of a developmental player. So is it fair to say that, you know what? Maybe it's fair to kind of revisit that debate about the Lions investing in Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta and Jamison Williams in the first round of the draft, and also using first and second round picks for skill position players as opposed to invest in the trenches until you found that piece opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. Because as of now, the Lions are still looking for that player. You tried James Houston in the later rounds. That didn't work. You tried Broderick Martin, but he's more of a developmental player, and in 2 years, you got nothing out of him. You drafted a backup quarterback that has not really done much, that also could have been used on a defensive lineman. So I do think it's fair to look at. My opinion is that I like how the Lions have built. I think that you took chances on guys that are going to be contributors for a long time. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be one of the top 3 running backs. You maybe have your Saquon Barkley. And I do think that Jamison Williams is a player that, as long as he keeps his head on right, I think that he's going to develop into a home run threat. So there are multiple ways to build in the National Football League. But when you do peek at what the Eagles did, that's kind of a nice formula to say, hey, there's a balance of calculated risks, trading draft picks, signing a player that puts you over the top. Now, the player that put them over the top was Saquon Barkley. I don't think, and here's my point. Unfortunately, yes, Myles Garrett would help, but I don't think that's the final piece. You don't have enough still, even with Myles Garrett, because you got to remember, Lee McNeil's coming back from an injury. DJ Reader's going to be a little bit older. The depth along the interior, not good enough yet to be championship caliber. So even with Aiden Hutchinson, Myles Garrett, Ali McNeil, you don't have enough depth along the defensive line and the offensive line to compete and win a Super Bowl. Is that fair or foul to say, wait a minute, the way in which the Eagles developed might be something that you may need to kind of emulate if you want to reach the opportunities to maybe get to a couple Super Bowls and win one?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's kind of a unique revisionist history, and obviously the Eagles are getting their due, and Howie Roseman's done a great job building this team, obviously, and they won the Super Bowl. Like, they deserve to have this conversation about how more teams should be like the Eagles. But I do think what the Lions have done is a little unique, and I think that if we go back and we say, well, the Lions should have done this, well, they did draft Aiden Hutchinson second overall. Like, there's one guy that they've invested in. They drafted Josh Paschal in the second round. The year before that, they drafted Levi Onwuzurike in the second round. They drafted Aleem McNeil in the third round. So within the first 3 rounds, you've invested a lot in your defensive line. And the thing is you want to revisit whether or not they should have taken Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta where they took them. And that's a completely understandable argument because of positional value and all those things. But I would argue that the Lions would not be what they are right now without some of these skill guys. Like, when you take into the impact that Jahmyr Gibbs has on their offense, like, take him out and replace him with a defensive lineman, and then now your offense isn't as explosive, and you have to count on that draft pick to hit at 12 overall. Like, I don't know. The revisionist history just doesn't do a whole lot for me, because the Lions they got to 15-2 with the way they constructed the roster right now. It wasn't enough to win the Super Bowl this year, but you also have to take into account the fact that they turned the ball over 5 times in that game. And, unless you make the swap at quarterback, which they're not going to do, the 5 turnover game isn't something you draft. Like, this is a complete – the reason they lost in the divisional round was because they didn't show up, right? I don't think I'm wrong in that aspect. After being a team that really took care of the ball all throughout the regular season, the biggest game of the year, they turned it over 5 times. And to me, that's not something you draft. You just have to be ready for those big moments. And so I think the Lions have done as good a job of any of drafting their core to this point in Brad Holmes' tenure. When you talk about Sewell and Hutchinson and Gibbs and Campbell's coming along, I'm telling you, in another couple of years, I think he's going to be a mainstay for that defense right in the middle, depending on how long the Lions stick with Alex Anzalone. And then you talk about guys like Jamison Williams and Aleem McNeil. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a 4th-round pick in 2021. If they choose to bring Derek Barnes back, he'll be a part of the big part of the defense. Brian Branch was a 2nd-round pick in 2023. Like, they've done well in the draft. Let's not get that misconstrued. Now, you could argue that they could have devoted these resources to maybe fortifying the trenches a little bit, but they have taken swings on defensive linemen, guys like Paschal, where Paschal's pretty good against the run. We're still waiting for the pass rush production heading into year 4. Onwuzurike's been hurt, but the potential is there. He's an interesting decision for the Lions this offseason. And then guys later in the draft, like James Houston, where he had an amazing rookie season or second half of his rookie season, and then it just hasn't worked out from there. So the Lions have devoted resources to the defensive line. It just maybe hasn't necessarily panned out as quickly as the Eagles have. And I think that the way they've drafted has made them what they are, because they've drafted players who fit their scheme and fit their culture. And a lot of these guys, when you look back on the last 4 years, as I am right now, these are guys that are huge contributors for them. And so I think the draft isn't necessarily the issue. I think, the overwhelming message for the Lions this year is, when you're on the biggest stage, you got to show up, and you can't turn the ball over 5 times and expect to win. And they've got a lot of pieces in place, but you have to execute on these big games. And the Eagles played their best game of the year on the biggest stage, and that's the way it's got to be. And you could argue the game before that against the Commanders was their best game of the year. And then against the Rams, they did enough to win in the snow and the conditions and all that. But this is a team that elevated its game in the postseason. I believe they were plus 13 in turnover differential in the playoffs, which, wild card divisional round, championship game, Super Bowl. That's 4 games. And you were plus 13 in turnover differential. Like, I think there's on-field elements of this that need to be taken into account when you talk about doing things the Eagles way. I know that was super long-winded, but again, I think there's a lot that goes into it. And I think the draft is a little bit lower on my concerns because I think the Lions have done well.
Here's the thing, okay? You say that revisionist history doesn't do a lot for you. Well, here's why it does a lot for me, okay? The idea is that potentially, if Brad Holmes would have made different moves, the Lions could have copied what the Eagles did. There was no secrets to what Howie Roseman did. The opportunity to draft some of the Georgia defensive linemen was there for the Lions. They could have did the same thing. So what I'm saying is that if you're Brad Holmes and you're now starting your career as a general manager and everybody thinks that you're all world and all hitting and everything like that, everybody's giving you an A grade, you're up there standing pouting your chest after an NFC championship loss. You know what? The idea is you could have made the moves that the Eagles made. Those moves could have all been made similarly by the Lions. You could have made Saquon your final piece if you don't draft Jahmyr Gibbs because you're developing and you're looking at a skill position player. You could have said, okay, instead of Zadarius Smith at the trade deadline, maybe you go out and you get a wide receiver. Maybe you invest in a player that could have come here. So what I'm saying is that the idea is, I know we're looking at roster building and things like that, but the idea is it has the feel when you look at what the Eagles did that the Lions, if they just would have maybe had a little bit of a shift in philosophy and taken one swing, might have a Super Bowl right now. I am sensing, unless you can convince me, and you have not done that yet, what you're saying is that, well, they're still developing. It hasn't happened yet. And I do believe the Lions are on that pace. They're trending upward. But my argument is not, okay, do I think that, Brad Holmes is building well or not building well? I think that the idea is I could sit here and what my heart says, the emptiness I feel is that the Lions should have won Super Bowl ring right now. I believe it could have happened. That if you would have maybe taken a swing in 23, a little bit bolder at the deadline, you know what I'm saying? In 23, we're all excited for, hey, make a bold move. And you walk up there, you bristly walk up to the podium, and you tell everybody, hey, we traded for a backup wide receiver for the Browns that they didn't want. And that was your move, Donovan Peoples-Jones. And then that's the time where, hey, maybe that would have been your Saquon move. You see what I'm saying? In
Mm-hmm.
that if he was bold in 23, there was a chance. Dan was feeling like, hey, that was a winning thing. And what you invested in was Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think what we're saying is, what stings is that I am feeling emptiness in my gut right now. I'm jealous of the Eagles. They have 2 appearances in the Super Bowl, and they have a win. And they got a mobile quarterback. They paid him. They rewarded him. They got a stud in Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. And they got a defensive line that wrecked the best quarterback in the NFL. And I think where it stings is the Lions were able to kind of replicate that, but they didn't. And so that's where the void is. But I do think, okay, I can get over that void right now. Okay, I'm impatient. It's been 59 Super Bowls. And how many appearances do the Lions have in those Super Bowls?
0.
0.
Yep.
Okay, so there is a little bit of urgency that is behind the context of why I'm upset.
Yeah.
But I do believe the Lions are building in a way that gets you chances. What I'm saying is that I think the ticket was there to cash in, and you maybe didn't take the chance to put the extra $100 on the ticket to do it, and you were a little bit cautious at the time. This year, you can't blame them from going out and getting Zadarius Smith. You had a hole. You just were ravaged by injuries. But I think looking back, there were opportunities to draft differently that maybe would have allowed the Lions to get to the Super Bowl this past season. So I do think that that's intriguing, and I think that's where some of the people are looking at, hey, wait a minute, moving forward, maybe now you got to reinvest in the trenches in the draft or go out and get Myles Garrett. Because here's now where we push this forward. You have Myles Garrett, and everybody wants him. There's no way you can sit there and say into a microphone, I don't want Myles Garrett. But the reason why we have to maybe potentially make up for mistakes is to overpay for Myles Garrett. But you're hearing reports it's going to take 2 first-round picks. And the smart people on the internet that are sharing information draft and develop or go out and get Myles Garrett. I think that it's still worth the risk to trade 2 first round picks. If you trust your evaluation and you feel like you can get more impactful defensive linemen later on, it's going to be determined, more people's opinions will be shaped by how Mekhi Wingo does. If Broderick Martin becomes a little bit more stout against the run, we'll see if some of the investments in Menu will end up paying off because you had a handful of picks of guys that could have participated but did not. So that's why that strategy is a little bit out there.
Mhm.
But can you revisit the question? Is it too much? 2 first round picks for Myles Garrett? I think that's what they're asking for. I think it's going to be kind of a Alex Bregman situation where maybe you wait it out and you get down to a 1st round pick and a later 2nd round pick. But for the Detroit Lions, I just think 2 first round picks with how the way Brad Holmes looks at things, I start to think that the tide could be, you can make the argument that might be too much based on the fact that I don't think Myles Garrett puts you over the top, even with what you have on this roster. Do you think the Lions got to take it carefully in regards to Myles Garrett? Or if it's 2 first round picks for Myles Garrett, do you make that trade straight up to bring one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL to the Lions?
I mean, we talked about taking swings earlier, and the reason I've been a little bit more patient with the Lions in terms of analyzing their draft and things and compared to how the Eagles have done it is because I think this could be the swing. Like I think this could be the investment that they make that puts them over the top. And I've been patient with it as far as with all the trade deadline stuff. Like everybody wants to go get the next big name, right? And a lot of times, unfortunately, in the NFL, it's not as realistic to see these big name type of players. Like you're not going to get a Luka Doncic type trade in the NFL, I don't think. But I think in this situation, if you're the Lions and it's 2 first-round picks, you have to think about the impact that these first-round picks could get you. They're going to be late in the first round. So you take into account that the player you get, the caliber or type of player you want at that pick might not be able to give you in the immediate term what Myles Garrett can give you. And I think if you're gunning for a Super Bowl in the next 2 years, while you've got guys like Jahmyr Gibbs on rookie contracts, then you've got to go after it, in my opinion. And I know there's some financial elements of this that need to be taken into account. And I don't have the exact numbers pulled up in front of me, but it's going to come with a cost. Like it's going to be tough to think about the fact that if you trade for Myles Garrett, you may also have to extend him. And now down the line, you're paying him a bunch of money and this, that, and the other. And so it's not like we should just throw all inhibition to the wind here. But I do think if this is the move you want to make and you need a big swing that you think will help take you over the top, this might be a risk they have to take. And you've got the young pieces in place. You have the guys on the rookie deal, some of your best players, Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph right now is still on a rookie contract. Aiden Hutchinson's on a rookie contract. You've got the avenue to make this a 2-year run here if you're the Lions. And so I think that if you take into account all the financial elements of this and all the other things that come along with making a move like this, and you sit down and you think, well, let's do it, then you've got to do it. Like there should be no hesitation if you feel good about it if you're Brad Holmes. I think they've got to do it. I think that now is the time because this roster is not going to be this cheap forever. And if you're Brad Holmes and you feel confident about letting Jamison Williams walk so you can find the next speedy wide receiver, then by all means, so be it. But guys like Aiden Hutchinson don't come around every draft class. I'd argue guys like Jahmyr Gibbs do not come around every draft class. Sam Laporta and how quickly he was able to acclimate. Guys like him don't come along every draft class. You're not getting a Penei Sewell in every draft class. I know they already extended him. Guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown are super rare. So the draft and develop thing, you're not going to be able to hold on to all these guys. So I think if you want to maximize the next 2 years, you have to make this trade. And you have to live with the consequences, be it with the salary cap or giving up the first-round picks. You just have to live with it, and you have to go for it. And if it doesn't work out, then Brad Holmes, I know this isn't going to soothe anybody's emotions if it doesn't work out, but you can look back and say, you know what, he gave it his best shot because you traded for one of the best defensive players in the league. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and that's something everybody's going to have to live with. But I think based on the construction of this roster, a guy like Myles Garrett, without a doubt, puts them over the top. So I think the question everybody's asking, and I want your input on this, is if they don't trade for Myles Garrett, do you think where they're at right now with another first, let's say they take a edge rusher in the first round, and it's the best edge rusher available. The just first name that comes to mind is Mike Green. If they do not trade for Myles Garrett and they take Mike Green, do you think this roster is good enough to win a Super Bowl?
No, I don't think so. That's the tough part,
Yep.
is that this is where some of the mistakes in free agency also come into play in terms of depth. Emmanuel Mosley didn't work out. Marcus
Yep.
Davenport didn't work out for depth. You recognize that, all right, you made some trades, you made some draft selections for guys that you wanted to be developmental. Hendon Hooker, Giovanni Manu, and Broderick Martin. Those are three guys. Those are five players right there that did not contribute much to a team that was pushing. So that's why the emptiness grows, is that some of the mistakes that were made impacted the end result, bottom line. But the development's still there. So remember, too, that up until this point this year, like I said, injuries play a part. And we'll never know what the matchup against the Eagles would have looked like had the Lions been completely healthy with Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, Aiden Hutchinson, Marcus Davenport. But in the end, those decisions were made. The decision to bring on Marcus Davenport didn't work out. Emmanuel Mosley didn't work out. Carlton Davis eventually, the injury caught up to him and fractured jaw, and he's not there. So I do think that that's why, you are now in this position to make a move for Myles Garrett, is because the other moves, that's where this compounds the issue, is that you kind of have to. You got to kind of cheat a little bit. It's not bad cheating where you look at it and you say, well, you're getting Myles Garrett and you're going to really improve Ali McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson. So you got to cut the corner because you made mistakes. That's just the way it is. And it may be
Yeah.
the punitive cost is 2 first-round picks for not being able to pick defensive linemen with guys that you chose to develop first. And so that's where I think that the mindset is that this football team had a chance to have their one Super Bowl. I truly believe it. There was a chance. It's a missed opportunity. Now, that's in the past, that's over. But we should say clearly this football team could have had a Super Bowl. They could have had a Super Bowl win. It didn't
Yeah.
happen. They're still sitting with a goose egg. But moving forward, there has to be just a little bit more aggression. Now, there can be different moves. There can be maybe be other moves that can be made that are a little bit more shrewd as opposed to the grand slam swing. But we're saying, hey, make a little bit more than a guy over the age of 30. Here are the parameters. Not someone over 30, not someone with a history of injury, not somebody that you kind of are hoping is going to do something, somebody that is talented and can come in and contribute and be somebody that can, okay, all accounts, no questions asked, Christian, me, everybody will say this guy will contribute and be a piece. And that maybe has to be a little bit more aggressive in free agency and maybe move away from our process and just be a little bit more aggressive, because the Lions could have been in that position where they were one guy away this year. But that, like I said, the injuries, once you lose Aiden Hutchinson, that just kind of changes the whole dynamic. We're
Yeah.
talking 21, 22 into 23. 23 was the big miss. That was one Super Bowl that was lost. 24 is an outlier, but moving forward, got to ask you then. We know the Eagles are the number one team in the NFC. Are the Lions number two, or do the Commanders? In my opinion, I think when Jaden Daniels, I still would take Jared Goff over Jaden Daniels in 2025, but quickly Daniels in
Yeah.
2026 is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So that window is closing real fast. Other teams are catching up. I do think the Bears are going to catch up. I do think that the Packers are going to continue to retool if they find their number one receiver. The Vikings, if they find their quarterback, if JJ McCarthy is that guy, or if they bring back Sam Darnold and bring him more opportunities, there's an opportunity for them to get better. So the pathway to the NFC Championship game gets harder and harder every year. But right now, I do believe that the Lions are the number three team in the NFC. I think that number one is the Eagles, two is the Commanders. I think that they'll get better. I think that their defense is attacking. You like what they bring to the table. I like Dan Quinn and his defensive philosophy. I do think that they're going to continue to get better, but it's really close and close. Like if you say the Lions are number two, I respect everybody that says that, but I think that when you look at quarterbacks and you look at what Jaden Daniels can bring to the table with his mobility, that gives the Commanders a slight edge. And Cliff Kingsbury will develop them another year. I like Brown. I like Terry McLaurin. I like what they're doing with their young defense. So there's opportunities, and they got Sanders Drill, a playmaker in crunch time. So it's not to poo-poo the Lions. I think it's neck and neck with the Commanders and the Lions. But the teams right behind, Packers, Vikings, 49ers, they're right there chomping at the bit. Are the Lions still, in your mind, right now, the number two team in the NFC?
No, I have them at number three as well, and just because where we stand right now, it's all merit based. And when the Commanders and the Lions played, the Commanders smacked them, and the Lions turned the ball over 5 times. So I think that revisiting this after free agency and the draft, I may have a different opinion just based on how the rosters will be more fully formed, and there's some decisions the Lions have to make in terms of internal free agents that we'll probably start to catch wind of here in the next little bit before free agency starts. But I think right now they are number three. I think it's number three. The Commanders have the young core, and maybe they just got hot at the right time, and they did have a stretch in the middle of the year where they were struggling. But I think the pieces are in place for them to be really good for a long time, as long as Jaden Daniels doesn't regress in his second NFL season. And I think when you look at the Lions, they still have a ton of young talent, but that talent, I mean, they're not getting younger. And you're going to start to have to endure some questions about the offensive line this offseason, which we've wrote about a couple times already this offseason with Graham Glasgow and what they might be able to offer for Kevin Zeitler if he wants to come back on a new contract. So, yeah, I mean, there are some little holes starting to pop up here, and I still think the Lions roster as constructed is really solid. And we've talked about how it may not be enough to win the Super Bowl, but they're still going to be really good because a lot of the reasons they were really good are going to be back in Lions uniforms next year. And you're going to get Hutchinson back, and you're going to get Lee McNeil back. And so, yeah, I think the Lions right now are number three. It goes Eagles, Commanders, Lions. And I think that gap isn't very big. I think the Eagles opened up a little bit of a lead on the Commanders and everybody else because they are the reigning Super Bowl champions, and they got a ton of pieces that will be back. But I think the Lions still have what it takes to compete in the NFC. They just need to address make a couple moves so that they can get over that hump and pass the Eagles and beat them when it matters most in the conference championship game. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot at stake moving forward for the Lions when you talk about proverbial windows closing and opening. But I do think that they've got the pieces in place to still be really good. But how they attack this offseason will determine whether or not they're able to cut the cake, so to say.
Now, and moving forward, we will address one more thing, a wart from 2023 that potentially is maybe one of the bigger factors why the team didn't get over the hump. I know the execution that people are going to talk about against the 49ers, maybe Dan Campbell not taking the points, but there's a wart, and it was revealed at the Super Bowl, a big wart. And sometimes it doesn't get reported at the time, but you kind of maybe got a sense of it just based on how CJ Gardner Johnson, then AKA CD Deuce, started to treat reporters and how things were kind of the vibe that he kind of created in that locker room. Now, one guy's not going to create a toxic environment, but it's just noise. Okay. And so here's the other wart, maybe even a bigger wart than what people are discussing, but not as big as totally derailing the season. But CJ Gardner Johnson was not happy. He was not happy at the midway point of the season, and he got a vibe. All right. And it was a contract money vibe. You bring in this guy, unfortunately, he gets a major injury
Yeah.
and he decides, I'm not going to rehab in Detroit. He's like, I'm just going to go back to Florida, do my due diligence, work hard, and be able to get back. And he did. Credit to him for working hard and getting back. But he was getting the vibe. Where's my contract? I don't have any guaranteed monies left for you with this team. Where's my new situation? Where's my new contract? You're going to bring me back. What's going to happen? And he's not sensing that it's going to happen. He's being told that. He's working hard, working hard. He's being told that, hey, we're going to value you. We're going to put something out there. And I think in that situation, he was looking for that kind of throughout the rehab. So I thought he maybe said, okay, if I work hard in rehab and show that I'm going to get back well before people think, they'll put an
Mm-hmm.
offer or start to say, hey, we value you and things like that. But I think at some point he got the realization, oh no, I see Branch. I see Kirby Joseph. I see Ifatu
Yep.
Melifonwu. I see the writing on the wall. Wait a minute, I'm a starter. Why I got to split time with Ifatu? What's the deal? And he got the writing on the wall, and he let his emotions get in play. Now, did I think he sabotaged the situation? No, but it was real intriguing. Remember, Dan Campbell put out an onus. I don't want flagrant penalties. I want you to keep in check. He put that directly in the media publicly. I don't want retaliation. Keep your level head. What's the first thing that CJ Gardner Johnson does is he goes after Debo Samuel for his own personal vendetta, gets a penalty in that game, and he looked terrible in that contest. So this says there's no guarantee that you take a swing on somebody that's risky and it works out because there's contracts involved. And then
Yep.
when the season ends, they're like, see you later, alligator. You're not part of the team. We're not giving you that contract. And he comes out and he's like, that season was hell. And they lied to me. And he put that out there publicly, and rightfully so for him, his own personal situation. But I do think that when you look at it from the Lions' perspective, they got better, younger, cheaper in regards to, hey, we got foundational pieces we got to pay. We got da 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 da. We're going to use you for the year of service that we got. You were hurt and you kind of were not exactly the locker room model that we're looking for. But unfortunately, he gets the ring. He gets the investment from the Eagles, and they're like, oh man, we were missing that dude. So one can make the argument, well, that was a swing you didn't take. You invested cheaper, younger in Brian Branch. Maybe the argument, and someone could say, maybe CJ Gardner Johnson, that's happy and healthy with Kirby Joseph, might have been a situation that could have resulted in further advancement. How do you make how do you wrap your mind around what CJ Gardner Johnson said publicly? And now that he gets a ring, knowing that, well, it was a swing that they took, but he ended up kind of being a little bit not similar to the other guys in the Lions locker room.
Yeah, I mean, for him, it must have been a frustrating year because the whole premise was he signed the 1 year deal so that he could prove to the rest of the league that he was deserving of a long-term contract. And so he took a prove it deal with the Lions. And in week 2, he goes down with the torn pec. And initially, the diagnosis is he's done for the year, but he was back by the end of the regular season. And so while he did an excellent job of rehabbing and putting in the time to get back on the field, there were some factors that were not in his control that just didn't play out his way. And as a role, as a result, when he came back, his role was a little bit diminished within the Lions defense. And I'm sure that's a frustrating thing for him to, number one, have to spend the entire season rehabbing when you were hoping to prove to the rest of the league that you were one of the best at your position in the entire league. And then now you have to work your way back from a significant injury. And then number two, like the last half of the year, Ifatu Malafanu just got hot and was rolling. And when you look at what he brought to the defense as a blitzer and as a safety, and he had a couple of huge interceptions, like when you take all that into account, like you can't take that guy off the field. Like he's just been playing so well for however many games that was, and now just because C.J. Gardner Johnson gets back, and I know that there's a proven element where Gardner Johnson is without a doubt the more proven player than Melifanu, just based on the fact that Melifanu's missed a ton of games over his 4 years of injuries, but Melifanu was the right guy at the right time for the Lions. And so, with the Lions being a meritocracy where you earn your spot, like CJ Gardner Johnson had to work his way back into the rotation. And so it didn't work out last year, and he wound up back in Philly and got a ring, and that's great for him. But I also think that parting ways with him in a way benefited the Lions defense because Brian Branch moved from the nickel cornerback position to a full-time safety. And I think the Lions got the best version of Brian Branch in 2024. So yes, they invested in a younger player as opposed to going with the veteran who's proven it. And while Gardner Johnson is a very good player in this league, I think for the Lions, the move was a net positive because they got to pair Branch with Kirby Joseph, and now they have one of the best safety duos in the league. And you can make the argument that if it was CJ Gardner Johnson out there, it would be the same exact thing. And I think that's totally fair. But I think that Branch and what he brings to the defense, he's a younger player. He doesn't have the body of work yet, but he seems to be on track to become a guy who can work his way into the all-pro conversation and the perennial Pro Bowl conversation. So I think the Lions and the Eagles both won, and the Eagles got Gardner Johnson in the Super Bowl, and the Lions got the chance to put Brian Branch in his natural habitat, so to speak, at the safety position. And it worked out for him because Brian Branch was really good this year.
Yeah. So before we summarize succinctly what we've been talking about, Aiden Hutchinson did have comments. I thought that his appearance on Pat McAfee was telling and was revealing and insightful. But he also did some other conversations as well as he was down there in New Orleans on Radio Row. And he kind of was asked about, I believe at NFL Honors, he was asked about the opportunity for the Lions to realistically trade for Myles Garrett. And I think that his comments kind of got blown up. And I do think that some context was a little bit needed in that he was asked, like, hey, knowing that there's a salary cap or financial, what's the realistic, like in some form of what's the realistic option here or what's realistic for the Lions in regards to trading for Myles Garrett. And he's like, yeah, in regards to the salary cap. It's going to be a little bit tough. I just think the last line that he said that, it may be unrealistic, maybe kind of got blown up a little bit, or saying that he doesn't believe truly that it's really, it's unlikely is
Yeah.
one of those phrases that kind of is like, maybe that whole sentence, though his response that he gave for that answer, I think was fine. It's honest. It's going to be tough to fit in, but then people kind of say, well, is he kind of then looking at the money situation? I do think he just needed one more sentence, which was, but any team would love to have Myles Garrett. Every team would love to have it. And I do think that to me, it got tapered a little bit when you see his photo with Myles Garrett. And I'm probably sure he's like, they asked me about you. And I was like, oh, it probably is not likely. Look how much we got to trade to get you. I'm sure he joked about it. So I don't think it was all that serious in
Yeah.
regards to the response that people made of it. But I do think that the proper answer would have been like, yeah, I think the perfect answer was Amon-Ra St. Brown on his great podcast where he says, I'm going to text Brad right now. Let's do it. Like, it's not Aiden's job to worry about the cap. Like, you can say, yeah, there's cap and stuff like that, but if Brad can make it work, if Brad can work those numbers, I hope that he's doing the extra work to get somebody. I think that our defensive line would be great. What do you mean you can't have that many dudes on the defensive line? Figure out a way to do it. Yes, you can. You can have a lot of dudes on the defensive line if you find the right pieces. And so I just think that those comments, I thought could have been better. I just don't think that it needed to be analyzed that way in regards to
Yeah.
maybe people kind of being a little bit upset at what Aiden and how Aiden answered it. I thought he just answered honestly from a financial perspective that it's going to be tough. But if you're Brad Holmes, that's your job is to make the magic work. Like just, you know, take from one player here and give to player X. You know what I mean? Restructure, find avenues, take someone's what's the standard rate now of how this is done? Take someone's um bonus and make it salary, or take
Yeah.
someone's salary and make
Yeah.
it bonus, whatever that formula is to increase how much you have available. Get that for Myles Garrett, and you can do that. Transfer it down the road, extend it, kick the can down the road, play those math games, play the salary caponomics. So whatever you got to do to be able to get Myles Garrett. So if you're Aiden Hutchinson, I think that you could have just answered it better, and maybe you're not used to that question right then and there. And I know you're always trying to say the right thing, but in all honesty, you asked me that question, I'm like, yes, Myles Garrett is the greatest, one of the great defensive linemen. I think every NFL team would want to have him. He's going to be very high in demand. I know it's going to be tough with the salary cap, but if we have an opportunity, any chance to get him, it just makes our team better, and that's what I'm all about. That's a simple answer. That one I thought that he should have gave.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was mostly tongue in cheek, like sarcasm. I'm not too concerned with it, and I think that he may be, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he controls his platform with his podcast, so he can be a little bit more out there as to where Hutchinson's making his rounds on Radio Row. Maybe it's been a long day and he's just tired, and I'm sure that everybody who either hits him up from his inner circle or whatever is all asking about Myles Garrett. So I didn't pay too much attention to those comments. I think you're right, he could have been a little bit more like optimistic in that sense where he's saying, yeah, let's go
Yeah,
get him.
type
But
season.
yeah, I think that, but all in all, I'm not too concerned with his comments on that. And I think that obviously he is aware of the fact that if they were to get Myles Garrett, they would be I mean, they would have a strong case to be the best tandem of edge rushers. And then when you start to talk about the fact that they've already got a really good safety duo, they've got some pretty good linebackers, and then that, like, now all of a sudden the tune on the defense has completely changed. So yeah, I mean, it was interesting, really, just real big picture. The Radio Roll thing, just following along with all the guys, and everybody's doing their campaigns, and Hutch has got the Gatorade jacket on, and I thought that was kind of funny. And but yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to think about the spectacle of the Super Bowl, and the game is the game, but then the whole week leading up, you have all the hoopla going on. So yeah, I mean, all in all, just to put it big picture, I thought it was pretty fun to follow along with throughout the week.
Yeah. Now we asked real quickly here. We asked in a previous podcast. We know that the Lions would have lost to the Eagles as constructed. In regards to their injuries, the way in which it would have shook out. If they were able to, with all those injuries, get past the Commanders, it would have been tough. But now we got to ask the realistic question. You see a healthy Eagles team. If the Lions were healthy, do they beat the Eagles? Do they get past them? Because many people still believe that a healthy Detroit Lions football team, Aleem McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson, maybe Marcus Davenport, that the odds of him staying healthy were always going to be a long shot. So, that's here nor there. But you realize, okay, Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, Amik Robertson, that would have been a hell of a game. So that
Yeah.
kind of lends to everybody saying that maybe the Eagles and Lions, everybody healthy, week one might be a nice opener at the link there in Philadelphia. But mano a mano, Lions healthy with what the defensive line brought to the table. I think it would have been a slobber knocker. It would have been close. It would have been a chance. I think the Lions would have had a chance to go toe to toe with the Eagles. It would have been one of those great games where it probably would have came down to the wire and who would have made those plays. Maybe Jameer Gibbs makes that play. David Montgomery healthy. You realize, okay, maybe the weakness was going to be Taylor Decker and Graham Glasgow. I think that was going to be tough. I think that the Eagles would have feasted. They might have got that turnover. So, in my opinion, it would have been close. The Lions had a chance. They were not going to bash the Eagles in the NFC Championship game healthy. Mano a mano healthy. I think it's a super close game, maybe even overtime. But I think the Eagles' defensive line with Vic Fangio, I think
Yeah.
he's just a little bit more experienced than Aaron Glenn. I think that if you were able to win that way, it would have been. I just think they're just a little bit better on the defensive line. It's not a knock on the line. It's just credit to the Eagles. They built a ferocious team, and they also dealt with injuries too. You also got to remember Nakobe Dean. You also got to remember Brandon Graham. Healthy, mano a mano. Would have loved to have seen it. We got cheated, Lions, and your injuries, but it would have been close. But I give the slight edge, 1 point win, 37-36, 40-39, whatever you want to look at, 28-27. I think the Eagles were basically 1 point better than the Lions.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. Look, the Lions, when healthy, had what it took. Like they had a lot of the pieces to compete with a team like the Eagles. But I do think watching like that version of the Eagles that we saw last night, I think
Oof.
would they would
Unstoppable.
take. Yeah, I don't think they would blow the Lions out, but I don't think 10 points is out of the realm of possibility. Just the Chiefs were completely flummoxed. Like they had no answers up front, and so the answer was to try to roll Mahomes out. And you didn't see the Lions rolling Jared Goff out a whole lot. Like he'll do the play action thing, but as far as like bootlegs and things like that, didn't see a ton of that. And so I just think that the way it would have went down was the Lions could keep pace early, or they would have to rally late. It kind of, you know what? I think the best comparison would be the Bills game. Like I think the Lions would at some point find a groove offensively and be able to score, but I think they would be playing from behind. And I do think that having a healthy defense would kind of limit the production. But look at what the Eagles were able to do, even with Saquon Barkley being effectively neutralized in the run game. I think he had like 2.3 yards per carry. Um, and they were still able to just hit big plays, and they were attacking. You know what it was? They were attacking the man coverage out on the edges with guys like A.J. Brown, and then they hit the big one to Devontae Smith. Like the Lions play a ton of man to man, and obviously it probably would have been Carlton Davis in this world where everybody's healthy lined up against A.J. Brown, and then Terrion Arnold against Devontae Smith. And I don't know how that goes. I think the Eagles hit big plays, and then obviously Hurts' ability to run is a game changer. So I think the Eagles were a little bit more well rounded, and I think the Lions were there, like they could compete with the Eagles. But I think that on that stage, even with both teams healthy, the Eagles win, and I think they win it fairly comfortably, somewhere in the 7 to 10 point range. I think.
Okay, I think to succinctly recap everything we've talked about, the Lions had a chance with their rebuild to be further along. They had a chance to be in the Super Bowl. Some of the luck factor did not play in their favor, but also some draft mistakes and free agent targets and the willingness to be aggressive at certain times, I think prevented the Lions from having their one Super Bowl. They could have had it with bolder moves in 2023 and a little bit of a slight adjustment in their draft strategy. They could have been a team that was the Eagles this year, cementing their legacy, winning their football game, getting to the Super Bowl, and dominating the Chiefs. The Lions had their chance, but the window's still wide open, and the Lions still can push through it. But it's going to take some improvement. It's going to take a little bit of an increase in aggression, a little bit of a decrease in the willingness to take players that are developmental players. You cannot take a Broderick Martin, Giovanni Manu, players that you expect to develop and play in 3 years. You need ready this draft. I know the strategy is, the Lions have ready-made veterans and they got a long way to go. No, you need to find talent with every pick that you have should be competing to be a starter. Will that happen? Maybe not. But no projects, zero projects in essence, no projects. Players that will compete to start right now in 2025 because the window, just as quick as it opens, it shuts just that fast. So, because of the fact that you're paying everybody, and it's one of those deals where some proven talent is going to walk out the door this offseason and next. So, I do think that lessons will be learned. They will be definitely observed and should be learned from the Eagles. And this football team, the Lions' future is still bright, but the sting is there because one got away. No doubt about it, one got away. And now Brad Holmes owes the Lions a Super Bowl and maybe even more. At least some more appearances. Because right now, zero appearances and zero Super Bowl rings. Now, just to wrap up some things from the NFL Honors Award, I thought that Dan Campbell getting snubbed. I was predicting Dan Campbell, but then I think everybody knew once Kevin O'Connell showed up there and Dan Campbell was doing his social media rounds, not taking photos on date night as opposed to being in New Orleans. Well, I think everybody realized Kevin O'Connell was the winner. And I think it was a snub. I truly think it was a snub. And I think it's even more disrespectful to Sam Darnold because everyone's like, man, Kevin O'Connell was able to win with Sam Darnold. That must mean something special. But I do think that the ability for Dan Campbell in the regular season to win 15 games, despite all those injuries, really spoke to the organization, the game plans, the ability to make do, the next man up mentality. I thought Dan Campbell should have been coach of the year. I thought it was a major snub. Kevin O'Connell, and here's the thing the two coaches faced off against each other, and the Lions were 2-0 against the
Yeah.
Vikings. So, in the biggest game, I thought that the final game, the finale, should have been Coach of the Year Bowl and the Lions dismantled the Vikings. They played well. They were great. Our best players were better than their best players, and the Lions outcoached the Vikings, and they won the division. And I thought that the voters, you start to look at some of the AP. I love the transparency of the AP to put out who voted where. I just thought that a lot of people giving credit to Kevin O'Connell didn't understand deeply what was truly going on in Detroit, and they way overvalued and disrespected Sam Darnold and said, "Wow, if he got wins, then Kevin O'Connell must be a master." I thought that was a snub.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you on that 100%. The Sam Darnold thing obviously was like the deal breaker, and the Vikings did surprise a lot of people. And they did hit on a couple of their free agent acquisitions that they made with Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel. There were moves that they made that made them better this year, and Kevin O'Connell certainly deserves credit. But I think you just got to go back to the fact that the Lions essentially had an entire starting lineup's worth of players on injured reserve on defense for 3/4 of the season, essentially. And they were able to finish the year 15-2. And I know that the offense was really good. Ben Johnson was NFL Assistant Coach of the Year, and that's all fine and dandy. But the shuffling they had to do, I remember Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, when they were just pulling guys off of practice squads, like Quan Alexander, Miles Adams, Jonah Williams. They're just trying to plug the leaks. And I think that they put a lot of effort in. And I know that's not all just Dan Campbell, but I think within the scope of the award, I think that was enough, given the fact that they dealt with all that and finished with the best record in the NFC. And who knows? I maybe there's other things that I'm missing, but I think just on a pure resume basis, the fact that he was 2-0 against the Vikings as well should be factored in. And yeah, I thought he was snubbed.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the weirdness of it is that then Ben Johnson's the assistant coach of the year. So basically, you give all the credit to Ben Johnson. Well, Dan
Yeah.
Campbell's got to the recipe all together. And I think that people underestimate what Dan Campbell brings to the offense as well. He's in the mix. He's in those meetings. So I
Yeah.
think it should have been reversed. I think Dan Campbell should have been coach of the year. And maybe you also give credit to Aaron Glenn as well as the assistant coach of the year for having
Hmm.
all that. I mean, Ben Johnson had all the talent that stayed healthy. So there's a little bit of intrigue there in regards to the respect factor. I thought the Jared Goff situation was fine. I thought that you could make the argument that Lamar over Jared Allen because Lamar Jackson was named the All Pro. I get it. I understand that. It would have been nice to see Jared Goff win the Payton Man of the Year award,
Yeah.
being that he was there. But it was good to see Barry Sanders there having to check his way into the microphone. Hey, please let Barry kind of get to the microphone, please, presenters. But that was great. He's like, excuse me, I need to have my speech here. I thought that the show itself was kind of, dragged along a little bit, but in the end, it's a 2-hour award show, and the Detroit Lions were well represented. Seeing Hayden there,
Hmm.
Jared Goff, and things like that. And I thought the Lions were well represented on Radio Row too this past week. But now we hit the offseason, just a couple weeks away. We're going to now turn our attention to the combine, the players there. I'll be at Indianapolis for the first couple days, talking to the coaches and the new assistants and things like that. So there'll be coverage, Lions on SI, as we recap 2024. And we look ahead now to 2025 with mock drafts, with draft profiles, with recapping everything the Lions did. We have a lot of content already from the end of the season in January. If you want to go back and look, and talking about some contracts we'd offer, some of the free agents, the offseason primer, hopes and fears, and Christian's been doing a great job recapping the positions of what's going on. We'll have a deep look at how each position right now shakes out with the salary cap. So make sure you check out Lions on SI for free, FREE, for all your Detroit Lions needs. No additional cost to you. You just go visit. And as well, thank you for the early support for our YouTube page, where you can see the videos that we put out, the podcast as well. Lots of locations to get it. No reason why to miss any content from Lions on SI, as everything now goes out to everywhere. Videos, the website, the YouTube, and everywhere that you enjoy your favorite audio podcast content. Lions on SI and the Lone Wolves podcast will be there as well. Christian, I thought that we really handled the debate very well, really taking a serious look, but a fair look at what happened with the Lions. So Brad Holmes owes us a Super Bowl, and I think it's coming. But at this point in time, it's not fair to just it's not fair to blindly just say, yeah, it's coming. There's a chance. They're building in a way, but now there's a blueprint on how it's supposed to look. And man, credit to the Eagles. They're the world champs. Darius Slay, credit to him, former Lion. Credit to Brandon Graham, former Michigan Wolverine. And you recognize that, all right, I didn't ask you, but maybe we'll open it for next time, about Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, as opposed to Tyrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw. We'll table that for next week, because I don't know if my little heart can take maybe a misstep there in regards to secondary evaluation, especially when it's 2-2. Christian, great work as always. Latest Lone Wolves podcast wrapping up. Thank you guys for listening, engaging, commenting. I love it. You guys are passionate. You make what we do fun. Right, wrong, and different. We love sharing our opinions, and we appreciate the opportunity that we get to be in the arena to talk about the Detroit Lions. Christian, I can't wait to fire it up next time on the latest Lone Wolves podcast.